Hey, everybody, welcome back to another episode of the Mr. Productivity Podcast. Hey, have you gone to MrProductivity.com yet? You should. Sign up for my email newsletter. Get free training from me, MrProductivity.com. Jason Feifer is on the show today. He's actually back on the show. More about that in a second. He has a book, Build for Tomorrow, an action plan for embracing change, adapting fast, and future-proofing your career. Jason, welcome.
What a pleasure to be back. Thanks.
Do you remember what episode you were on? I'll give. First of all, this is episode number 1289. You want to take a guess?
Oh my God, this is 1289. Was I in the 600s?
You're three digits, but it was
no. It was that long ago. That's crazy.
Yep. April 23rd, 2019, and I asked Siri how many days that has been. 1,896.
Wow.
So I'm glad that you finally came back.
I appreciate you having me. That's crazy. Time flies.
Yeah, it does. And I'm not going to say I remember what we talked about
in the first
episode. That was so long ago. But you didn't have the book out when you were on my show the first time. And I love how you use a really powerful word, an action plan in your book, because a lot of people, I'm an avid reader. But the magic is not reading like your book. The magic is actually taking action.
Yeah. So I love that you said that, because as a guy who has spent his entire career in traditional media, and only in the last 8 or so years, I've been an entrepreneur since 2015, 2016. Only in that amount of time have I really transitioned myself into being both a media guy and also a entrepreneur myself. I have a media company. I advise startups. I build things. Have I come to realize something that I didn't think about as a guy who just made media, and that I think everybody needs to think about, no matter what form of communication you have, because anybody in business is in some way or another also a storyteller, also a communicator, whether that's on LinkedIn, whether that's you have your own podcast, or whatever it is. What I came to realize, and Mark, what you just said there is so powerful. I write a book. Nobody wants a book. I make a magazine. Nobody wants a magazine. I make podcasts. You make podcasts. Nobody wants a podcast. Nobody wants these things. What they actually want is to improve themselves. And in a way, you have to think of content, however you produce it, as the second best, most available option. You know what people actually want? What they really want is connection, right? When they're listening to this podcast, they don't actually want a podcast from Mark, right? They don't wake up in the morning and they're like, I really wish that I could spend an hour listening to audio. That's not what they want, right? What they would really like to do, Mark, is sit down with you and absorb the wisdom that you have and apply it. But you're not scalable. I'm not scalable. And so the way in which we scale is through content. But we have to realize and remember that the thing that we're making isn't for its own sake. Nobody wants my book. What they want is to be more adaptable, to recognize new opportunities in front of them, to be less afraid of the change in their business. And the book hopefully is going to deliver that. We always need to be mindful of that when we're putting something out in the world. Focus on the outcome people desire, not the medium or the experience that you just happen to be putting in front of them.
One of my favorite authors
thank you.
Is Robin Sharma. And he says, instead of reading 52 books a year, why not study 10 to 15? And I was that guy. I would race through a book, put it on the shelf, read the next book. And then when I heard that quote, I'm like, am I doing anything with all this knowledge that these authors are giving me? Think about it. Your book goes for, right now on July 1st, your book goes for 15. To
be clear, for context there, my book came out in September of 2022. And, as a book gets older, Amazon just starts discounting it steeper and steeper. So anyway, go get it. It's a steal now. Anyway, what were you saying?
But here's the deal. You probably would charge any listener of this podcast way more than $15.59 to read the entire book to them. So I think people need to understand, Jason wrote this book and he put his heart and soul in this book, but you can't get the return on investment if you're just going to read it. I agree. I like to know your thought about this. If you buy a book, you read it and don't do anything, you've wasted your time and your money.
I 100% agree with that. This is why people do this all the time. I used to be, my very first magazine job was Men's Health. I was in my 20s. I moved to New York. I got a junior editing job at Men's Health. You want to take a guess? This will be obvious. I don't know. But you want to take a guess as to what the best-selling edition every year, just pick a month, what the best-selling edition of Men's Health is every year?
I'm going to say it probably has something.
That would be a reasonable guess. No, the answer is just January. The best-selling issue of Men's Health is January.
Okay.
Because, of course, they have their New Year's resolutions. They're saying, this is the year I'm going to get back in shape. And so they subscribe to or they buy off the newsstand Men's Health, right? And then what do? Most of them don't do anything because having just taken the action of buying Men's Health to them made it feel like they did something. Just like if somebody's feeling overwhelmed and they buy a book about productivity or they buy a course about productivity, maybe they get to say, oh, now I've done something. You haven't done anything. If you haven't consumed it or, consuming it isn't even, if you haven't put into practice the things that you're learning, then you haven't done anything. But I think the reason, anyone who's ever gotten into the courses business knows this. The courses business online is a nightmare, right? The course completion rates are in the toilet. Most people buy courses and they never take them, or they take the very beginning of them. Why? I think the reason is not because the courses are bad. I know a lot of people who make amazing courses. The reason is because people buy these things because they have a need, and then they treat the acquisition of the thing as action. And it's not action. Buying the course was not action. Reading the book was not action. Doing the hard work of implementing the things you learn, that's action.
Reminds me of my late parents who had this doorstop of a Bible. And the only thing they used it for is for death notices and marriage notices. And I remember talking to my parents before they passed away. I'm like, have you ever read this? Oh, no, we never read it. I'm like, it's not a magic shield. You actually have to read and apply and live by what it teaches. So I think, I'm 59 years young, and I remember I was at that age when I became a solopreneur back in 2005 that I thought just taking a course, magic. Just going to a conference, magic. Just hiring a coach, magic. And then as I matured, and I would like to think I got wiser, I'm like, oh, I have to do something in order for the magic to happen. And just because I do something doesn't mean the magic's going to happen right then and there. You have to keep on doing the action. And then all of a sudden, something pops and you're like, oh, I did it. No, what happened was you did action day after day after day, and you reached the inflection point, like what I like to say, the roller coaster. You're going up the hill, and then all of a sudden you're going down the exciting hill. If you don't like roller coasters, I don't make the heavy vertical, but that's the analogy I use. And that's the thing. It's what's that when Michelangelo, I think, was carving the marble for the statue of David. He was hitting it. Nothing was happening. All of a sudden, and that one strike, boom, there David began to be born. And I think people need to understand it. It's more than just taking action. It's taking consistent action.
So here's something to think about, both as a creator of anything. I don't mean that in the internet creator term. If you're in business, you're creating something for people. And also on the consumer end, if you're consuming things, whether it's books to help you out or whatever. I found it really helpful on both ends of this to think about this. Most people, yourself included, are not going to remember the vast majority of the things that you learn. And if you're teaching, people aren't going to remember the vast majority of what you said. And that can be depressing, or it can be an incredible guide. I remember first thinking about this in very personal terms, and then I'll make it into business. I remember thinking about it in very personal terms in 2011, which is when I got married. And my wife and I were planning this wedding. It got way bigger than we wanted it to, because both of our sets of parents wanted to invite a ton of people. And suddenly this wedding is much bigger. And then my not to throw her under the bus, but my wife's mom had very strong opinions about the different things that should happen at the wedding. And so, of course, it turned into a bunch of battles. And the way in which I was able to step back from those battles was to think, okay, I've been to a lot of weddings. How many things do I remember from each of the weddings that I went to? How many? I don't know. Lauren and Brian's wedding. I went to Lauren and Brian's wedding. How many things do I remember from Lauren and Brian's wedding? The answer is 2. Maybe I remember 2 things. Okay, if that's the case, then why don't we think about it that way? We're going to make a wedding. people are going to remember two things from this wedding. Why don't we just pick? Why don't my wife and I just pick the two things that are going to matter to us that we want them to remember? And let's just optimize for that and just let go of the rest. And that's exactly what we did. We optimized for two things, which was that we had our wedding was right before Halloween. So we did a surprise Michael Jackson Thriller flash dance. We had taught a bunch of our friends Thriller, and then they marched onto and then our vows, our vows were really meaningful to us. And then the rest, whatever, like the table settings, literally nobody's going to remember that. So if somebody else wants to take control of that, fine. Now you start applying that to business too. People pay me very nice money to stand up on stage and deliver keynotes for 30, 45, 60 minutes or more. And I watch people do keynotes and they jam it full of information. Their slides are like full of all this data. Nobody remembers that. I build my keynotes off of getting on stage and basically offering one big idea and then breaking it down into three somewhat smaller ideas, each of which comes with a story that could take me 10 minutes to tell a story. And what I'm really doing is I'm just ensuring that I deliver a small number of meaningful things on stage and then telling stories so that people remember them and apply them, because that's what matters. And because if people don't remember them, then what was the point of telling them in the first place? And I drive that through everything I do. I have a newsletter. It's called One Thing Better. That's it. One thing. Each week, one thing. You want to find it? It's at onethingbetter.email. That's a web address. Onethingbetter.email. Anyway, this is now how I operate. I think I'm going to go out there in the world, and instead of jamming a bunch of information at people, I'm going to think, how can I do a singular thing that's going to matter and not worry about everything else? And then as a reader, I'm going to read, honestly, I'm reading fewer books than I ever did. I'm listening to fewer podcasts than I ever did, because I'm picking the ones that matter to me instead of just consuming and then instantly forgetting. I think to myself before I pursue something, am I going to remember this? Am I going to remember this? Because if the answer is no, then why on earth am I going to spend the time with it? And I've found that to be clarifying and valuable.
One of the content creators I follow on LinkedIn and X is Justin Welsh, and I took his LinkedIn course, and the first thing he tells you is, I'm here to give you value. This is the low production course. And I really like that, because when I buy a course, I don't care what shade the background is or the font. Just give me the information. And that really helped me as I'm getting ready to create my next, Alex Hormozi calls it the Grand Slam offer. I'm going to keep it low maintenance, because I don't think people want the bells and whistles. No. To your point, they want the material. They want, what is that next thing I could do that's going to get me from point A to point B? And most people don't care about the colors. Matter of fact, I have a good friend of mine. She spent like 90 days creating her course, all the font and the pictures and all the stuff. She had a real job, in air quotes if you're listening to audio, because she didn't sell it. She created something she wanted, but she wasn't promoting it. And I think she would have been better off if she spent less time creating this gorgeous course and just giving people the nuggets and promoting it. But a lot of people got it backwards. When I created my course, nobody asked me for it. I didn't validate it. I just said, I'm going to create a course. And I sold one because I didn't listen to my audience. And I think most content creators listening to this episode are going to go, oh, yeah, I've done that. I did it twice. I didn't learn my lesson the first time, so I did it the second time.
Yeah. Justin's really smart. I know Justin a bit. And I actually was just telling Justin this recently. If you go to his website, and I actually strongly recommend everyone does, it's justinwelsh.me, M-E, justinwelsh.me. What I was telling Justin was I am in the process of redoing my website right now. And every time I write something for my site, I then pause and think, what is Justin's version of this on his site? Because I bet it was done in fewer words. And then I go to a site, and sure enough, it is done in fewer words. Like, it is so insanely, the word economy of his site is insanely good. It is just like everything, right? You go to his site and it says, turn your knowledge into income. Everyone immediately understands, this is for me, this is not for me. And then you scroll down and he just starts, being a solopreneur is about embracing your life. We approach our work, anyway, like whatever. This is not an advertisement for Justin Welsh, but like it is, the word economy is so strong. And I think what he really understands throughout his entire brand is that the thing that matters most is connecting with people and making sure that you are answering at all times the question that people are actually asking. It's really important to know that and this isn't Justin, this is my own analysis. We haven't talked about it at this level, but whenever anybody encounters anything that you do at the start of it, whether that's you put a product out in the world, whether that's you're standing on stage in front of them, whether that was the first couple minutes of this episode of the podcast, they're asking themselves the same question. Same question. Question, is this for me or is this not for me? That's it. That's all I want to know. Is this for me? Is this not for me? You better answer that question as fast as possible. You better anticipate that question. And bells and whistles don't tell people if it's for them or not for them. What tells them is what you're sharing with them or what you're showing them, the immediacy in which you are able to identify and start to address their pain points. That's what matters. And so I really appreciate what Justin does because his brand is so clear and his products are so clear. They're not for everybody, but they're going to be for the people who they are for, and those people are going to see it immediately. And that's very powerful.
100%. And even though I went through the lengthy and expensive process to trademark Mr. Productivity, this probably won't shock you. Not one person's ever come to me and says, hey, Mark, how can I be more productive? They come to me and they say, I am so overwhelmed with my to-do list and my calendars. And so I'm like, oh, I'm going to start talking about overwhelm because that is what people resonate with. Nobody wakes up and go, I'm going to listen to Mark's podcast because by golly, I want to be more productive today. No, they want to figure out how can they live a life and still get their to-do list done and still take care of their family and still go to their kids' recital. That's what matters to people. And so, but going back to the theme of the show, I had to learn that through books and training and having guests like you on the show. I'm like, oh, now I get it. But that's why Napoleon Hill says that most people don't strike it rich until they're in their 60s because it takes you all those years to make all these mistakes, recover from those mistakes, get some wisdom, and then all of a sudden you start putting the peg in the hole, I guess you could say. Some of us are Mark Zuckerberg and Elon Musk, but they work real hard. So they're not like sitting back and just phoning it in. So everyone who's successful works their tail
that's
off.
right. Except, hilariously, Napoleon Hill, who was an absolute fraud. He didn't even write that book. His wife wrote that book for him.
Yeah. I wonder how many people know.
I don't think a lot. I don't think a lot. Yeah.
Well, I want to go back to something you said about Justin's website. I'm a big minimalist. So I crafted my my contact page after, I think it was James Clear. Very minimal because when people have a need, they want to go to your website and, to your point, is this going to help me or not? They don't want to read words and words and words and words. They want to know, is Jason or is Mark going to help me? And I think a lot of people make their home pages very braggadocious. It's all about me. I'm awesome. I wrote this book. I got this podcast. They don't care. I, as a visitor, I have an issue. Can you help me? And I think this is a mistake I made for years, but I think people need to focus on, we all say we do, but really focus on who's coming to your site. My wife is my accountability partner. I want to change the font or I want to change this on the website. And she'll go, are you going to hire yourself? I'm like, no. Like, then why? This is not for you. And it took me years to get over the fact that my podcast is not for me. My website's not for me. It's for people who need my help.
So I have so much to say about this. You're absolutely right. First of all, I had a similar moment where I discovered that I was doing that wrong. An older version of my website had launched, and the hero language on it, or the first language that you see when you go to the site, it said, what did it say? Oh, it said, the big language was champion of change, which was this like phrase that I'd come up with many years ago. And that's how and then underneath it said, guy who helps you get excited about the future. And then there was like a button for how I'll show you how or something. And out of nowhere, a copywriter named Tom Gill emailed me. And he did this thing that I think is very smart that people should do in sales, which is instead of just mass blasting, to spend some time with each individual potential client and then send them some actual value that shows them that you have something that they need. And in his case, he sent me like a video that contained a couple pointers about things that I was doing wrong on my website. And one of them, he said, was, he's like, hey, you go to this website and the language that people see is about you, but it's not about the person who's coming to the website. They don't care about you. They care about themselves. So you need language that addresses their pain points. And of course, as soon as you said it, I thought, oh, that's exactly right. And then I started to look around at other personal websites and started to appreciate the art of the very first thing that you see, right? I read that Justin Welsh one, which was, what is it? To turn your knowledge into income. It says, you go to Marie, I'm going to do it right now as I'm talking, marieforleo.com. And the first thing that you see is create a business and life you love. And there's just so many wonderful examples of this. Like, I strongly recommend people spend some time just like popping around on people's sites and see the first language that they see. And this goes for companies too, right? So Smart Passive Income, which is a fantastic online community for entrepreneurs that I'm an expert in residence in. You go to smartpassiveincome.com and the first thing is become the entrepreneur you want to be. Perfect. Love it. Matt Gartland wrote that copy and he's very smart. He's the CEO over there. And what it comes down to for me is this, and this particular framework was a real game changer for me. So I want to share it with you. My friend Rochelle DeVoe, and this goes beyond website copy. This is really how to relate to and understand and communicate with your audience. As Mark, one of the things you were talking about there was, what do people actually want? They don't want like productivity. What they want is to have more time with their friends and family is what they want. So Rochelle DeVoe is a consumer insights researcher. She's become a friend. And she has this framework for how you need to be able to communicate with your consumer. And the framework is this. She says that you need to, from the perspective of your consumer, you need to be able to speak the following Mad Libs-like sentence, which is, when context, I want solution so that benefit. Again, this is from the perspective of your consumer. When context, I want solution so that benefit. All right, let's break it down. When context. So this would be the situation in which somebody needs a solution. Rochelle likes using the example of a compression sock company. Okay, when context. When my feet hurt from standing all day. I want solution. I want what do I want? In this case, it would be, I want to feel comfortable while still looking good or whatever. And then, so that benefit. So the benefit in this case would be so that I can do my job, be present for my family, enjoy my life while not standing out. All right. Why are we saying this? Because most people in business focus on solution. They spend all their time building out a solution. And so they think a lot about their solution. If you make compression socks, the thing you wake up every day thinking about is like, how do I get these compression socks on more feet? And so when you meet people who have foot pain, the first thing you do is you talk about your compression socks. But here's the thing. Nobody wants solution. Nobody cares about solution. What they actually care about is benefit or outcome. What they're really focused on is what they want because of the solution. I want to be present for my family and enjoy my life while not standing out. Or I want the time to be able to enjoy my kids or whatever the thing is. That's what they care about. And so the more in which you harp on your solution, the less time you are actually meeting them where they are, which is that they're focusing on the benefit. That's the orientation point that we all need to have. And so that is how you have to think about your marketing. That's how you have to think about your product development. That's how you have to think about every single word in every single form of communication that you make towards anyone who you want to take any kind of action.
Now, listener, if you didn't write that down, because I wrote that down. If you didn't write that down, you need to right now rewind about 3-4 minutes, because Jason, I almost call you Justin. Yeah. You say his name so many times in the show. Jason just gave you a masterclass. When context, I want solutions so that benefit. We could stop the show right now and you got the gold. And that is, I hope I can read my chicken scratch later. If not, I got the replay. But that is incredible. But you said something very interesting. You said that you got to think about this with every bit of communication. But I want to talk to you about the wonderful world of social media. Because right now, I saw a study from Neil Patel from his company NP Digital, and he analyzed 7 million pieces of content, and the overall majority is short form video. It's not even close. Blogs, nothing is even close to short form videos. That shows our attention span. Now, there is a 60-second limit on YouTube Shorts. Meta gives you 90. TikTok gives you 10 minutes. And X gives you apparently forever. But what I find interesting is my wife will take all these videos from all my podcasts and stuff like that. She'll make these shorts. But every once in a while, I'll just go up there and just create a video. And sometimes if I'm just recording a video in the moment with just a vague plan, they seem to do better than the ones that are pre-scripted. Do you have any idea why that would be?
That's a good question. Well, I do have thoughts, but let me just clarify the situation here. So in other words, you're saying sometimes you're taking existing material, let's just say a conversation from a podcast, and editing it down into that length. And then sometimes you're just creating something more organic to the medium. Maybe it's just you in selfie mode. Sometimes you're scripting it, but sometimes you're just doing it off the cuff. And what you're finding is basically the more casual and off the cuff, the more it performs.
Yeah, I get more views, more comments. It's almost because I've heard the research I've done is the overly produced content is becoming less popular. People really want to know, show me you in your raw state. That's why stories are so great, because they only last 24 hours. So people are less professional. This is me. This is behind the scenes. Gary Vaynerchuk even shared this a couple times. Sometimes he'll put content out there. He'll think it's trash. It does really well. And then his team will create this great piece of content and it won't do well. And he goes, it just goes to show you that you could have the best plans for content, but you don't get to decide how great it is. Your viewers get
that. Yes, that is very true. And anybody who is in any form of media creation, whether that is at a professional level or just casual, will quickly learn that for themselves. Everybody that I know, whether they make social media content for a living or whether they're professional journalists, will tell you that they can almost never predict the ones that hit. And I certainly always has been the case for me. Even before I got into this line of work and I was just writing for Men's Health or for whatever, it was simply impossible to predict which pieces of yours did the best. And the thing that would drive everyone crazy, everybody in media creation has some story about this, is that they would spend months working on something and it would be, dead on arrival. And then they would fart something out in 3 minutes and it reached 10 million people. And that's just the nature of it. So like, why? I do think that something that you said about the polished, unpolished, that there's a lot of validity to that. It's not a hard rule because obviously things that are polished can also do quite well online. But I do think that there's been a pendulum that swings back and forth on social media. And there was a moment where high production was doing really well. And then I think in contrast to that, people started to post things at low production and that started to do really well. And it felt more organic and more authentic. And if I had to put money on something, I would say that there would be a backlash to that because, of course, low production means that the barrier to entry is incredibly low and people will start to compete against low production with higher production and the pendulum will probably swing back. But I think it's really important to think about ultimately, who are you serving? And are you serving them organic to the medium in which they are experiencing you? It is very hard to take a conversation on a podcast and edit it down into a social media clip that's going to do well. It's not possible, but it's very hard. And I think it's reasonable to understand why, because who does that really serve? Who does taking a podcast and editing it down for social media really serve? The answer is not the audience. The answer is the podcaster, because the podcaster wants to promote their podcast. So obviously there's a disconnect here. There's less of a compelling reason for somebody who's flipping around on TikTok to stop on something that doesn't feel like it was created especially for them. But when you just sit in front of a camera and you talk to an audience, whether or not you've thought it through or not, you're at least starting to meet people where they are. And then it's going to be a question of how relevant are you and how compelling are you and whether or not you're going to be served to people who are truly interested in what you have to say. But this is the only thing that you can control in social media is the amount of output that you have. That's it. It's the only thing you can control. So it's really a question of how many swings at the bat or how many swings at the ball do you want? And I think the Gary V model is as many as you can possibly take.
Speaking of Gary V, he's the reason why I started the podcast now he says the whole point of having a video podcast is so you have content for shorts. Now, full disclosure, when I create my shorts based on whether from my podcast or someone else's podcast, it's just me and it's always value. So I don't put my logo on there that says the Mr. Productivity Podcast. It's just me giving value. So sometimes it's 20 seconds, sometimes it's 80 seconds, but it's always about value because I understand that people are going to find my content. They may have never heard me before. And that's why I used to be one of those guys. Hi, I'm Mark STRUCZEWSKI. No, it's Mr. Productivity. Swipe. They don't care. So now it's just value. The whole content is value because nobody cares about who I am. Yeah. They want to know, again, here's the theme of the podcast. What am I about to say or what am I about to show them? Is it going to help them? They don't care about anything else. And that's why I'm no longer caring about my metrics. I don't care how many downloads, followers, subscribers, likes, comments. I care, am I helping people? That to me, I think is going to be in the long run, is going to help me then better than, how many people like this? How many people downloaded? Those metrics don't mean anything.
It depends on the model that you have, right? They mean something if you want to build a mass scale business and run advertising against it. But I think
true.
I think that your mind and your intentions are in the exact right place. You want to be able to separate what are vanity metrics from what are meaningful metrics. And you want to make sure that you have a clear sense of purpose and a clear vision for anything that you're creating, and then real and realistic ways of assessing how you're actually doing. I think it's really useful to think of what we might think of as quote unquote mass media products like social media, podcasts, and so on, as not necessarily having to be a mass market product. There are people who have a podcast that reaches 100 people. Like they just got 100 listeners every week. And that can be a great success because the only thing that matters is what is their mission and what is their definition of success. They could be serving a hyper niche audience and they've got the 100 most important people in that hyper niche listening to them. And that's going to drive great success, great value in some other way. Maybe only a couple of them need to turn into clients for it to be a substantial moneymaker. I helped friends of mine in PR get a podcast up off the ground, and it's like very specific to the hospitality industry. It's super niche. I don't think that they get that much in terms of listenership, but it doesn't matter because a whole bunch of their listeners became clients, and that was the point of it. I was recently talking to a guy who he has a podcast that serves those, and this is crazy. He was saying that because his audience, which is small, I think he's got like 1,000 people who listen to his show, but they're all CFOs. They're all CFOs. And because of that, he says he is able to sell sponsorships into his podcast at, ready for this, $20,000 an episode to reach an audience of 1,000 people. Now, I don't know, you may not know this about media, but media advertising is generally measured on what's called CPM, which is a cost per thousand. And the average cost per thousand in podcasting is like $15, right? So basically, if you have 1,000 people who are listening to your podcast, you would get $15 from MailChimp or whatever, whoever your advertiser is, right? This is a $20,000 CPM. And the reason for that is because it's 1,000, he's reaching 1,000 high quality, very focused people who are exactly who his sponsors want to reach. And if they spend $20,000 and one of those people turns into a client, then it was made back and then some. And that goes to show you that you don't have to reach millions and millions of people to be successful. Gary Vee reaches millions of people. That's fantastic. Good for him. That is only one model of operating. You don't have to do that. You can, in fact, reach a small number of people. And as long as you understand the point of reaching those people and you make sure that, as Mark, as you're saying, that you're delivering value to those people and they are nourished by what you're offering and they have a relationship that is forming with you and they keep coming back for more. If you know what you want to do with that small audience and you're doing it, then congratulations, because that was exactly what success looks like.
I fought the idea for video podcasts for years because I'm an old school podcaster. Podcast are audio only. But now what I'm finding out happens, and we'll do this with this episode, I put the whole video on X, the whole video on my Facebook page, the whole video on YouTube. I can't put the whole video on LinkedIn because I got a 15-minute time limit. Hopefully they'll add that. So you can watch it video, you can listen to it audio, or if you like to read, if you go to my website, I have Claude AI take the transcript and make a blog post out of it. I know some people like to read, some people like to listen, some people like to read, listen, and watch. That's what I meant to say. So I finally saw the light, Jason, and I finally said, hey, if you want to watch a podcast, I don't get watching podcasts, but apparently
I don't get it either. I don't understand it at all. But yeah, it's just for some reason people like it.
Yeah. We're almost out of time, but before we go, I want to ask two questions. First of all, you gave us a ton of information. I'll never forget the when context I want solution, so that benefit. That was gold. Is there anything else you want to make sure that the people listening to the show, with all the information you gave us, because some people forget what they've heard 10 minutes ago, what thought do you want to leave them with?
I appreciate that. And I that framework is really powerful. Here's what I'm going to leave them with is once again, I just want to give credit where it's due on that one, which is that it came from Rochelle DeVoe. And I think it's really powerful to make sure that you're giving credit to people. We are all collectors of knowledge and information. And I think some people worry that if they keep citing other people's things, then they don't look authoritative themselves. I actually think that it's the opposite. I think that when I share something like Rochelle's thing and I cite her, what I'm really saying is, hey, I'm out there in the world meeting incredibly smart people. And part of the value proposition that I have for you, my audience, is that I'm a filter. I identify the smartest people, and then I identify the smartest things that they have to say. And then I deliver it to you in ways that matter. And then the thing that I'm adding is, lots of my own ideas. Today we basically had a conversation that was partially stuff that I've come up with myself and partially stuff that I'm sharing that I learned from other people. And that, I think, is an incredible value offering for anybody. So don't be afraid to collect and share and give credit where it's due. I think if you listen back, hopefully you'll hear me nod to a whole bunch of folks as we were doing that. So that's something that I hope people take away with. And also go check out RochelleDeVoe.com for what it's worth. She's really smart.
I keep thanking Gary Vaynerchuk a couple times a year for giving me the idea to start the podcast. He's never acknowledged me, but that's okay. One of these days he will. So final question for you, Jason. Where can people go to find out more about you? I know you gave us a website earlier, but people are like, yeah, what's the name of that website?
Yeah, I'll say it again. I appreciate that. Okay, so I'll give you two things. Number one, Mark, you were nice enough to kick off by mentioning my book, so I'll just mention it again. It's called Build for Tomorrow, an action plan for embracing change, adapting fast, and future-proofing your career. So you can find Build for Tomorrow any way that you find books, audiobook where I read it, hardcover, ebook, anything but Stone Tablet. Haven't done that one yet, but we're working on it. It's slow going. And then the other thing is my newsletter, which I also mentioned, going back to this thing that we were talking about being just really laser focused and not overwhelming people. It's called One Thing Better. Each week, one way to be more successful and satisfied and build a career or company that you love. And you can get that at onethingbetter.email. That is a web address, so plug it into a browser, onethingbetter.email. And if you want just like a bonus tip on that, the reason that onethingbetter.email exists, that's not actually where the thing is hosted. That's just, it'll just auto forward somewhere. But when I'm writing it, like when I'm on LinkedIn and I link to my newsletter, I do jasonfeifer.com/newsletter. But I don't want to say on a podcast, jasonfeifer.com/newsletter, because it's lengthy. And also people don't naturally know how to spell my last name. There are like 14 ways to spell Feifer. So I can't say that's not smart. So I thought, what can I register that people can hear and remember? And I thought, onethingbetter.email. And one of the first times that I said it on a podcast, the podcaster said, oh, is that one like ONE or the digit one? And at the time I had only registered ONE, but I thought to myself, I might be losing audience. So then as soon as I was off, I immediately went and registered it with the digit one too. So now it doesn't matter. You could do it either way. So anyway, there's a tip.
So I was going to ask that question. It's funny you said that because I actually got MrProductivity.com because for some reason nobody can go to markstruczewski.com.
Yeah. Oh my God.
So.
Yeah. No, you got a real tough name. This is why we did the same thing as Gary. So you didn't do it because you're hanging on. You did it because you just came up with a different name for yourself, Mr. Productivity. Gary was really smart to just brand himself as Gary V because Vaynerchuk is a tough name. Yep. It's a really hard one to remember.
Yep, it is. I remember one of the shows I heard him say, he goes, Gary Vaynerchuk. I'm like, very interesting. Jason, thank you so much for being on the show today. You knocked it out of the park again. I really.
Oh, hey, thanks for having me. And I guess I'll see you in another 1,000 episodes.